Hello, everybody. We are working on this repetition exercise, and I think repetition of diction is very clear. When you find words repeated, you notice those words being repeated, right? It's a little bit harder to find repetition of syntax because you don't have to have any repeated words to say that something repeats its syntax. So, syntax is a repetition of grammatical phrases, grammatically similar phrases. I'm going to show you an example of this. In a little part of Mandela's speech near the end, he has this sentence that says, "White supremacy implies black inferiority." And I would call this a repetition of syntax here. And the reason is because of the repeated ways that things are broken up. So you have an adjective, white, a noun, supremacy. Then you have the verb, which kind of divides the sentence, and then another adjective and another noun. So basically, both of these things are noun phrases, and you are repeating the way that you are using the noun phrases. So you can see how repetition of syntax kind of requires you to have some knowledge about parts of speech. If you don't know what an adjective is, it will be hard to find these things. But you can also, just when you listen to the speech, you can hear a kind of rhythm sometimes. And anytime you hear that rhythm developing, usually that's a sign that the repetition, that there is syntax being repeated. So here, it's really important to notice this because what happens is that by dividing this sentence with the verb and repeating it in the same order, you start to make some comparisons. So if this is an adjective and this is an adjective, you start to compare those two things together. You have white, maybe versus black. But you also compare the nouns together, right? So you have keep saying white. You have supremacy versus inferiority. And this becomes really important to his sentence because sometimes, and this would have been a very common argument in 1970s South Africa, sometimes people will make the claim that just because you are saying that that white people are like more powerful or capable or whatever, all of these negative things that are associated with white supremacy, sometimes people will make the argument, now that doesn't mean that I am saying that black people are inferior. Now, that seems totally obvious to our ears, right? But sometimes people will make the argument, and this is like old school racism, but like some group like the KKK will make the argument that it's not that they're racist, they just want to keep the races separate, right? But then they have all this kind of like white pride rhetoric. And here Nelson Mandela is pointing that out in a way that feels familiar to us from, 1950s, even with like recurrence of white supremacy themes today, that's going to seem familiar. He is putting these two things in contrast with each other. And he's saying that if you have supremacy, then the implication then is that you also have to have inferiority. And if you have white people, then the implication is that you are going to have black people. Now that is not a given. Race is not as clear as this, white versus black, right? But Mandela is pointing out the way that this government has made stark distinctions between the two. And by making those stark distinctions, they are creating a hierarchy of who is in power and who is not in power. So the way that he sets up the sentence makes that super clear because of the parallel way that the grammar is structured. So again, if you hear those patterns in the grammar, stop and consider the order of the words in the sentence.